All right, so something big just happened in Canada this week, and we have this NDP Liberal coalition, or Liberal NDP coalition. I'm not sure which one's more correct. What do you think? Who's the top? Who's the bottom? Is Justin the top, or is he a power bottom? He'd be great at both, probably. And Jagmeet's just a puppet. Like, he's a puppet either way. He'll do what he's told. So what do you think, Anyway, we're not really here to talk about political relationship roles. So let's put those aside and let's get into this coalition, because this has very big implications. I'm not too happy about this, and a lot of people aren't happy about this. So let's first take a quick moment to talk about the composition of governments. You have a majority government, minority government, and then you have these coalitions. A majority government doesn't just mean it's more seats than any other party. It means you have more seats than all of the other parties combined, all of them combined, right? So with the majority government, they can be very confident that most of the things that they put forward are going to pass. Assuming that everyone in their party is loyal and votes with the party, then we know that pretty much everything is going to pass. The opposition party doesn't have as much strength, doesn't have as much clout, and even if they convince everyone else and all the other parties to vote with them, chances are things will still pass. So there's pros and cons to this. One of the positive things is if you're the majority government, you're going to get a lot more done. You're going to get a lot more done during your term, and everything's going to happen faster as well. And no confidence, that's not going to happen unless people in your party turn against you. So there's a lot of good things that can happen with that, because a lot of good things can be held in, within the party goals. Whereas if there is a minority government, it is going to be slower because people will have to question things more. There will be a more responsible government. And what I mean by that is majority government is faster at getting things done. They push more things through. And a minority government has to be more responsible and face more questioning, be held up to the opposition more, try to gain support from other parties because they need the votes from other parties. So right now, with a minority government, Justin Trudeau has to get other people to sign on board with what he wants to do in order to get things to pass. Whereas when he doesn't have all that other support, it is much more difficult and is much more likely that he'll be met with resistance. Now, we have to keep in mind, we have the most silent opposition in Canadian history, the least oppositional opposition in Canadian history with our Conservative Party. But when you actually have a majority government, you can be very confident that things are going to push through so much easier, because you know that as long as all of your people vote and show up to vote, well, you're good to go. That's great. Everything moves forward. A lot of people think that a responsible government has to do with fiscal responsibility, because that's the only way that we have been showing a responsible government. That's the only thing that we've been really talking about and bringing up in the House of Commons is stuff to do with financial responsibility. But responsible government is the opposition and other people questioning what the current government is trying to implement in order to create open discussion, maybe to find weaknesses or things that haven't been thought about, just to bring up points and things that we can change to make it better for the Canadian people, right? And that should be our goal, is we want all Canadians, whenever a bill is passed, we want it to benefit as many people as possible and in the best way. Economics 101, or Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt, is basically to make sure that you don't just look at the short term, but you also look at the long-term consequences of any new policies. And also that you don't just look at one group and you look at all groups. Because if you're not looking at all groups, then you're essentially discriminating against certain groups. So that is something we might want to keep in the back of our minds for every single policy. And that would be something that a responsible government would do and should do, but doesn't do. So that's what a majority government is. And a minority government is one that didn't get the majority of seats, less than 50% of the seats. So one thing to keep in mind is anytime you have a minority government, it means that the majority of the country voted against them. So keep that in mind. With our Liberal Party right now, they got 32% of the popular vote. That means that 68% of Canadians did not want this. That's over 2/3 of Canadians did not want the Liberals in power. So it is very important when they are trying to push things through that we oppose them and hold them responsible. A coalition. Coalitions happen when more than one party comes together, and it's usually to form a majority. So this can happen. The oppositional party forms with other parties, and then they get the majority, and then they can push for a no confidence, push for an election. That's usually not going to happen when your Governor General, Mary Simon, is on board with the World Economic Forum. But if there's enough push, then it can happen. If the public pushes, then it can happen. Even when I have to say, even when you have a majority government and the opposition is very weak and can't really do much, if there is enough public pushback, if public opinion is strong enough and the polls are showing a lot of disdain for what the majority government is doing, then that still can put a lot of pressure on the majority government. So it's not just only what happens in the House of Commons. But back to the coalition. So you can have the oppositional forming coalitions, and then you can also have one where you have a minority government forming a coalition. And that's exactly what's happened now. They form a coalition, and now they have a majority. Okay, that becomes the majority. But the thing is, it's a majority government. Technically, the coalition is technically a majority government. But now, is it the Liberal Party? Is it the NDP party? Like I said, who's the top? Who's the bottom? What did the Liberals have to compromise in order to convince the Liberals, the NDP, to form a coalition with them? What did they have to compromise? Because they're working together, right? And we have to keep in mind, NDP voters didn't vote for the Liberals. Most of them hate Trudeau, and that's why they voted NDP. They said, oh, well, I'm not conservative, but I hate Trudeau, so I'm going to vote NDP. And then most of the people who voted Liberal, well, they look at people like Jagmeet and the NDP party, and they think that they're too crazy, too extreme, sociopathic, communist, whatever. They think they're too extreme. They're too radical, so they don't like that. So that's something to take into account. 68% of Canadians didn't vote Liberal, and 82% of Canadians didn't vote NDP. 100% of Canadians didn't vote NDP Liberal or Liberal NDP. Yes, there's some overlap between the two parties. There's a lot of overlap. That's why they're forming a coalition. But there are reasons that certain people voted for one over the other. So what did the Liberals have to promise or compromise to get here? And we have to think, what's going to happen to our economy? What's going to happen to energy? Oil, gas, LNG? What's going to happen there? What's going to happen with our natural resources, mining, rights and freedoms, spending, debt, inflation? Like, both these parties having a majority, knowing the things that they want to do, knowing that both Jagmeet and Trudeau and tons of their party members are all part of the World Economic Forum, young global leaders. So knowing these things, where are we going? What do they do to form this majority? So it's only 7%. So 7% of the seats are what the NDP has. And the Liberals have 45% of the seats. So how much did they have to compromise to get that 7%? And how much of that compromise is things that not even the Liberals want? It's very important. I can't stress this enough that 100% of Canadians did not vote for NDP Liberal or Liberal NDP. That party didn't exist. They didn't vote for that. And there's a lot of things that a lot of people didn't vote for that this new majority technically is going to be pushing through. And I don't even want to play this majority minority game too much, because let's just get to the root of this idea of democracy. Majority does not equal morality. everyone knows that. Like, just because the full group says it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. But for some reason, we act that. We talk one way and we walk another. So majority does not equal morality. But what do you think democracy is? Democracy is majority rule. Democracy is mob rule. Democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting what is for dinner. Do you know what groupthink is? Right? People in groups can do some stupid things. They don't use their minds the same as when they're critically thinking by themselves. We tend to succumb to informative and normative influence. Normative influence being you tend to conform to the perception of the norm, perceived norms. And informational influence is people tend to be heavily influenced by groups, thinking that groups are smarter. You defer your thinking to the group. You think that 10 people must be smarter than one. But what if one person has an IQ of 150 and 10 people have an average IQ of 100? No higher, with no individual having one higher than 120 or something. Who do you think is going to make a more intelligent decision? Well, people in groups tend to defer their thinking to the group. So we know these things, and think of what democracy is. If all your friends, we've all heard this at least once in your life from somebody, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you do that as well? If all your friends put a mask on, would you do it as well? If all your friends locked down, would you do it as well? If all your friends rolled up their sleeve, would you do it as well? If all your friends rolled up the sleeves of their children, masked up their children, would you do it as well? If all your friends were bullying someone else, would you do it as well? If all your friends were taking away the rights and freedoms of other people that you were fine to give up, but maybe they weren't willing to give it up, would you still go along with it? Right? That's democracy, folks. Two wolves and a sheep voting what's for dinner. What do you think is going to be for dinner? So why am I bringing that up? Why am I talking about majority and morality? Well, because we don't even have a true majority. Like, we talk about a democracy, but 32% of Canadians voted for the Liberal Party. 32. One third of Canadians actually voted for Justin Trudeau's party, for the Liberals. 1/3 of Canadians voted for them. And they have a majority government right now, which is going to be pushing through a lot of things that you might not like and I might not like. And we know that they're all on board with the World Economic Forum. 100% of Canadians didn't vote for Liberals or NDP. What do you think is going to happen with Bill C-10, Bill C-11, formerly Bill C-10, right? What's going to happen to alternative media, right? Censorship on media. And how much money are they giving mainstream media? How many hundreds of millions of dollars is our government giving the mainstream media? And what are they telling them to push? How are they controlling them? And then they're going to put this bill through on alternative media? What's happening there? Bill C-36? Hate speech? Pre-crime? Guys, you'll be able to take people to court for things they haven't said yet. I think this person might say something, and you take them to court. This person said something along the lines like this. It seemed like he kind of might have some hate undertones, and I'm worried he might say something hateful in the future. So you can take them to court. Pre-crime, hate speech. Bill S-233, which is talking about guaranteed livable basic income, not to be confused with universal basic income. And this is basically a segue to something that's going to work great with Chinese social credit system, digital currencies. And if you go on the Canada.ca, you go on our government website, Canada.ca, and you look up Chinese social credit system, stuff's going to show up. Digital IDs, digital currency. Look these things up. They're on our website. Look up Agenda 2030 on our website. And then keep in mind all of the people who are in line with the World Economic Forum. From our Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Governor General, over half of the cabinet, mayors, premiers. Okay? Keep all these things in mind. This coalition does a lot of things, and it's going to be a heck of a ride, and this ride is going on until 2025. Buckle up, guys.